who, by the way, made the decision not to use force to keep the empire together, and whom history will treat very, very well, in my opinion.
What do you think was the reason you were so successful? Was it that you were trained as a lawyer, that you are harder working than everybody else, smarter than everybody else, more clever, better surrounded by better people? What was the reason you were so successful?
Lucky.
Well, a little bit more than that, probably.
Well, I had wonderful parents who instilled a solid work ethic in me. I think, and by the way, I never wing it. I've always followed the prior preparation prevents poor performance mantra. I think those things made a difference. But I was brought up to believe that if you start something, you finish it, or you do everything you can to finish it, that sort of thing. But I was there at a wonderful time, and here's what I really think was the best thing for me. I had tremendous associates and assistants. They really performed beautifully, and I was the beneficiary of a lot of that.
Our relations with Europe seem to be under some duress.
America's strength is founded in large part on its alliances. I mean, we have alliances around the world that permit us to leverage our strength. They take care in feeding, and we need to do a better job of caring for them and feeding them.
So today, as we look at some of the problems the current president has to deal with, let's just talk about those for a few moments.
Yeah, sure.
An issue that you were deeply involved with, the Middle East peace.
Yeah.
What do you think is likely to happen?
I'm very pessimistic. I mean, I think the stars are misaligned badly. I don't see any chance of anything in the near term, frankly, and it's very sad. It's sad for the people in the region. It's sad for the Palestinians. It's sad for Israel, because she should not have to be a nation perpetually at war. There needs to be peace. I used to think it would happen in my lifetime. I'm not so sure now.
What about Korea?
I don't know. We've done this starting in 1994 in the Clinton administration, where we changed a policy of resolve and determination to one of conciliation and tried to buy North Korea off with aid and assistance. and we're never able to get them to give up their nuclear program. I don't see them giving it up. I really don't. And I hope we don't go over there and just take their promise that they're going to give it up.
What about China?
It is the biggest geopolitical, in my view, challenge facing American policymakers today is how we react to the emergence of China as the new global superpower. She's already an economic superpower, but I mean as political and security superpower.
Now, our relations with Europe seem to be under some duress.
Well, I think it's very important for us to understand and recognize that America's strength is founded in large part on its alliances. I mean, we have alliances around the world that permit us to leverage our strength, our economic strength, our military strength, our diplomatic strength. Those alliances are extremely important. They take care in feeding, and we need to do a better job of caring for them and feeding them.
On the Iranian agreement, would you have done the deal that was done under President Obama, or would you have pulled out as President Trump?
I don't think we should have gotten into that negotiation to begin with. I think it was a mistake because the sanctions were beginning to bite Iran. And I think if we were going to get into a negotiation with Iran, we should have not done it just on nuclear. We should have done it on nuclear and their support of terror in the region and gotten some promise on that.
In your time as Secretary of State, who was the one or two most impressive people you met outside the United States as foreign leaders?
I dealt with some outstanding leaders. I think of Gorbachev, I think of Thatcher, I think of Mitterrand, Shevardnadze, a wonderful former Soviet apparatchik who changed entirely.
Now, you met Gorbachev many times.
Many times.
And you were impressed with his intellect and his abilities?
Yes.
He seemed to have done an incredible job of actually changing the course of the world, maybe unintentionally to some extent.
It was unintentional. Much of it was unintentional.
Does President Trump call you for advice very often?
No.
So for people who are watching who would say, what are the words of advice for the Congress or the administration from the great former Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, Chief of Staff, Jim Baker?
I think that we absolutely have to understand that one of the biggest threats facing our country and facing our democracy is the political dysfunction we have today in this country. When I was there 25 years ago with Reagan and with Bush and with Ford, we reached across the aisle and we got things done. It happened with Carter. It happened with Clinton. That doesn't happen anymore, and that's truly tragic.
So your pleasures are still hunting and fishing and...
Yeah, and I like playing golf. I still go to the office. I'm still a senior partner at Baker Bonds. We have a mandatory retirement policy at age 65, but there's an exemption
for
if
Bakers.
You have been Chief of Staff of the White House, Secretary of the Treasury, and Secretary of State.
Well, they should have that exemption. So let me just say, after you left as your term in government, I had the privilege of working with you for about 15 years in business and other things, and it was one of the great pleasures of my life, getting to see you up close, somebody I'd read about, and thank you for your friendship and your great leadership for our country.
Thank you for yours, Dave.
They're brothers from rural Ireland who came to America to pursue the entrepreneur dream. Together, they created a payments company called Stripe in 2010, making it dead simple for small, young companies to accept payments from all over the world. It has since grown into a giant valued at $9.2 billion. Half of all Americans who bought something online in the last year did so without knowing via Stripe. The company now works with customers as big as Lyft, Facebook, and Amazon, processing billions of dollars worth of transactions for a small fee. Joining me today on Bloomberg Studio 1.0, Patrick and John Collison, co-founders of Stripe.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
I've interviewed you both separately many times, and I'm so excited to have you here together. So we're going to start at the beginning. You were born in rural Ireland. What was it like growing up the brothers Collison?
We grew up in the countryside, right? And so it was like a 40-minute drive to get to school in the morning. And actually, none of the friends we went to school with lived anywhere close to us. And so kind of when we came home from school, we couldn't go and run around and play with them. And so we had to run outside and play with each other. All else there was to do was to go and read books. We didn't have the internet, or we didn't get the internet until I was a teenager. And you kind of got used to, when you're sort of browsing these websites or whatever, reading about these products or services, having to kind of scrutinize the fine print and it'd be like, offer not available in the Republic of Ireland. And so kind of this sense of sort of staring through the glass at this kind of amazing world and internet out there, but sort of not all of those opportunities being available or equally available or whatever, sort of to, again, someone in the middle of the countryside in Ireland. And so, in the way that sort of Stripe is so focused on kind of global access and expansion of global opportunity and kind of all those things, this really was not conscious in any way, but sort of now looking back and, over the last kind of 20 years of my life, I think in some ways kind of that mindset was instilled by, again, this experience of sort of growing up in 1990s Ireland.
So how did you discover computers?
I think it'd be fair to say we were sort of free-range kids.
Yes,
in that I'm always struck in the US by people need even finer-grained calendar controls for their kids' lives. It's like half-hour increments are not precise enough. And in our case, our parents were pretty busy. They were both entrepreneurs running businesses they had started, and Patrick and I had a lot of latitude to figure out what we were interested in and go explore that. And so, you were the one who started with programming, but that was very self-directed. That was not the plan, as it were.
Like I mentioned, we read a lot, and so kind of the standard routine was after school, go to the library and get 2 books.
Walk yourself to the library.
Indeed, yes. I walked to the library. Get 2 new books, go home, read the books, go, rinse, repeat of the next day. And then at some point, I happened to get a programming book and just write the book.
So you read about programming. You read about computers before you had
absolutely,
one.
No, I read about the internet for years before we had the internet. Got a programming book and read it and thought this seemed awesome, and built my first little kind of janky website, and was very proud of myself.
So did you follow older brother's lead here?
Yeah, I similarly got into it when I was a teenager.
And didn't you hack each other's websites or something like that?
Did that happen, Patrick?
I think it's an important duty of the 16-year-old older brother to sort of help educate the slightly younger brother as to the potential security downsides of some of their work. And so I took that obligation, that duty, very seriously.
So you made it to MIT, you made it to Harvard, and in 2009 you both dropped out. How did you make that decision?
Patrick is the...
Safety in numbers, I suppose.
Exactly. Patrick is the honor of having dropped out of college twice. But in 2009, we just started in college. We had been building all sorts of side projects and internet businesses and things like this. And I don't think anyone ever, or certainly in our case, you don't set out to start a huge thing. You don't set out to build a large company. You set out to solve a problem, right? And there was this huge disconnect between the fact that all these new internet services and businesses were getting started. Smartphones had just arrived. It felt like such a land of opportunity. And then when you actually went to do anything on the business side of things and actually accept money for what you'd built, it was like going back to the 70s. And so I think it was honestly helpful that, one, we were definitely young when we started out, and two, that we weren't weren't coming from being industry professionals who had been in the industry for 30 years or anything like that, because you can bring a fresh perspective to it. And we started approaching it from the perspective of the people who actually proved to be the most important decision makers of all, which is the software developer who's actually building this stuff.
The thing that I think led to us dropping out was kind of the realization that what we initially conceived of as being sort
Wirecast.
a slightly niche product for developers or something solving a narrow problem or something like that was actually, this kind of lake was actually an ocean. And that the character of the problems we were addressing in terms of what is the global economic infrastructure for the internet, and why is it not possible, even then in 2010, to accept customers, payments, revenue from internet users anywhere in the world.
And how did your mom and dad feel about this? I mean, I know they're entrepreneurs.
I often wonder again, were I in their shoes, how would I react? But they were always sort of, they asked us to kind of explain our decisions. They didn't just kind of rubber stamp. But then they were always supportive, and I think John and I, are hugely lucky to have parents like that.
So you got into Y Combinator. You moved to Buenos Aires to build the company. Walk me through a little bit of the early days of building.
The early days of building just weren't that glamorous. It was myself and John,
of Wirecast.
programming all day, every day. We wanted to get up and running with real customers as soon as possible, and so we accepted the first real payment on Stripe in January of 2010, only kind of a couple of weeks after starting to work on it. And then the feedback loop was just, okay, what does this business want, and how will we go implement that, and let's make it happen as quickly as we can, and when we're ready, let's add a second business, and so on.
You say that no one has to fail in order for Stripe to succeed. What does that mean? I mean, does it mean you don't think you have any real competitors?
Well, I think there's a desire to set these things up as Stripe versus banks or X versus Y whenever there's a narrative about these things. A very large fraction of the time when people are building businesses on Stripe, they're building businesses in white space as opposed to replacing another business directly. The stat that is very motivating for us is that 5% of global commerce takes place online today. The other 95% is offline, and so that's what we mean when we say no one has to fail.
You've done a lot of partnerships with companies that could be perceived as your competitors, like Apple, like Google, like Visa. Walk me through the strategy.
We think all of those consumer payment methods will all be really successful over time, but what has always been lacking is a platform for the businesses to just manage and abstract the complexity of doing business online in 2018. When you talk to a business and just what is required, even for table stakes, to get up and running, managing the payments and the treasury and the regulation and the compliance and all the complexity that goes with that. First off, take doing it in the US and then take doing it all around the world. That was a hugely heavy lift beforehand, and I think had this really damaging effect where only large companies could do it and they couldn't pivot very quickly. And then you look at what internet businesses are doing today, the business models are changing, they're much more global, they're often getting much more complex, like a multi-party interaction or something like that. And so that's what we're focused on, and that's why, Apple Pay has been growing like a weed as a payment method, and that's phenomenal for Stripe.
On a global basis, the market sizes and the opportunities have never been greater.
Wirecast.
Stripe's been working with smaller businesses for a long time, but Bloomberg broke the news. You are now working with Amazon. You're working with Facebook, Microsoft, Allianz, Booking.com, Lyft. How does a startup that is growing, but still a startup like Stripe, serve such huge companies?
I think our success with sort of these larger companies and the companies you name, it's not kind of despite the fact that we started working with startups, it is because we started working with startups. In that, you know, when you start as a startup, and especially when you're serving startups, you can't bamboozle them with like fancy sales materials and like this big marketing campaign or whatever. Like, they're just not going to be deceived by it. They will assess you precisely on the product merits, what helps them innovate fastest and, you know, fulfill their ambitions and goals and all the rest as rapidly as possible. And so it's really punishing. And so we were forced to build a product that sort of, you know, helped them execute as quickly as possible.
So Stripe makes money by charging a small fee on every transaction. You're now processing billions of dollars a year for hundreds of thousands of companies taking payments worldwide. You're reportedly valued at $9.2 billion. You've raised $450 million in funding. Some analysts say your valuation isn't justified, and we've certainly seen companies going to the public markets that haven't been able to hit the market cap that they raised at privately. Do you have any concern that you won't be able to hit that mark?
I think we're certainly always paranoid that we need to execute strongly to actually meet the potential of Stripe. But if you're asking kind of does the potential market size support that kind of valuation? Absolutely, many times over, because again, the internet economy is so vast and so much smaller than it will be if we actually had the good infrastructure to support it.
Do you see Stripe as a public company?
Someday, quite plausibly. But the way we've always thought about ourselves is that we're in such an expansion phase. We're so far from reaching kind of the plateau of that sigmoid when things kind of stabilize and, you know, the whole business becomes predictable. I mean, I was in Asia back last week, and man, there's just like such vast opportunity there for every internet business, sort of Stripe included. That I guess we're just so fixated on making sure, how do we ensure that sort of what Stripe is doing in the US, in Europe, in Asia, in Latin America, and so on, that like we're really capitalizing on the opportunities there.
This is a demonstration
and we'll then, you know,
Wirecast.
backsolve from that to, you know, whatever the right sort of long-term, you know, structure of the company is. Yeah, we'll fit it, you know, within that.
Speaking of what's happening more broadly, you know, we're in a world of great political and economic uncertainty with President Trump being elected, with Brexit, with, you know, Facebook and Apple and Google, you know, on the other hand, sort of squelching all of the smaller companies and, in a way, you could say squelching innovation. Could that hurt Stripe, given that you depend on businesses getting started?
When you zoom out and I guess, you know, just take stock of
Wirecast.
sort of what's happening on a global basis, the number of internet-connected just users and people in the world continues to rise incredibly quickly. And of course, you know, around the world, middle classes are rising. I mean, 100,000 people are leaving poverty every day, right? And so I think on a global basis, the kind of the market sizes and the opportunities that sort of presented for, you know, people who want to do something new or want to kind of build something significant, I think those opportunities have never been greater. And, you know, there's always been concern that with the kind of the particular giants of the day are sort of overly dominant and kind of might exercise some of this force. And generally speaking, you know, those giants have only prevailed for sort of a particular window, right? You know, we had this concern about Microsoft in the 90s, we had the concern about IBM before that, and so on, right? And so I think there have always been sort of preeminent technology companies, and I don't see anything kind of distinctly different about the current generation.
Coming from Ireland, you know, what do you think of Brexit? Is it concerning?
This is a demonstration
I am
of
concerned
Wirecast.
by the general trend we're seeing in a number of countries around the world towards more inward-looking and more retrenchment, in part because I don't think it's the global long-term trend, right? It has been a mistake historically to bet against more global integration or to assume that people, you know, there will not be more migration of people, there will not be more migration of cultures, there will not be more migration of kind of goods and services and things like that. And I don't think things like Brexit are going to change that fact.
You both spent time with President Obama.
administration of Wirecast.
As the Trump administration takes things in a different direction, slide towards protectionism, what are your biggest concerns?
We benefit from such an amazing set of tailwinds, right? In that there have never been more people employed in the U.S. At any time in the past. The global inequality is falling. There's so much kind of good that's happening that I think.
There are some things that are alarming and some bad that is happening, arguably.
Absolutely. But I guess where I was going to go is that I think when you really zoom out and look at the kind of the full time series here, I think almost all of the major trends are going in the right direction. And so then what concerns me is what are the tail events that could really jolt these off course? It's not clear just how much influence a single person in a single country can have against all of these broader trends, but no, that is what gives me concern.
Our determination was that Bitcoin was not a good payment method.
Cryptocurrency is all the rage right now, and Stripe initially accepted Bitcoin, but recently stopped. Are you at all concerned that Stripe will be on the wrong side of history with that decision?
We're absolutely open to revisiting this. At the time we made that decision, it was trending towards being a digital store of value. I think that's a valuable thing to have exist in the world. I genuinely wish them the very best with that, right? It works less well for our use case. And this wasn't just kind of so much like a decision where we wanted to be the arbiter. We're just looking at the data, and it was declining rapidly in use as a payment method. If it starts increasing again as a payment method, then sure, great. We'll go back and we'll add it.
So Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, is it hype? Is it reality? Is it a bubble?
Our determination was that Bitcoin was not a good payment method, which is a very different discussion than cryptocurrencies generally.
Because the value was shifting so dramatically.
Well, and because the speed and cost of even just posting transactions on the Bitcoin network was the main thing. So we remain fascinated by cryptocurrencies from a technology point of view and just the general speed of execution in the space. I see tons of companies and tons of people getting distracted by almost vanity projects of, we'll put this database on the blockchain or things like this, because people are not really wedded in the technical details and what's necessary.
There's a concern that Bitcoin and blockchain pioneers are still mostly young and mostly male. This as the tech industry is grappling with a big diversity problem. If the tech industry doesn't start doing a better job, including people of all backgrounds, what are the consequences?
The tech industry
This is a
has
demonstration
to be a
of
place
Wirecast.
where people of any background or any demographic or whatever origin can really thrive. And there have been some big missteps on that front that have attracted prominent headlines, and rightly so. People are paying a lot of attention just to Silicon Valley and to how it is that we do things here, and there's kind of really real ripple effects around the world. And so I think for myself and John, we really try to start at home, as it were. And if we can't build a company and a culture and an organization that we can really be proud of, and that we can really feel good about, and that, again, where people of any background can really thrive, then I think we have not achieved anything of value.
Stripe, you guys have some really interesting things. You have an open floor plan, so people change desks every so often and can meet new people, gender-neutral bathrooms. You have an interesting email transparency policy where everyone can read everybody else's emails, as I understand it.
Ish, I would say. It's, people can choose to make certain emails available, but it's very much on an opt-in per email basis. But anyway.
Susan Fowler, the former Uber engineer who wrote that viral blog post about Uber, about sexual harassment and discrimination, and ultimately, resulted in the CEO leaving the company, she now works at Stripe. What do you see yourselves continuing to do to attract and retain, whether it's women or underrepresented minorities?
There's a whole bunch of sort of specific initiatives that we work on, right? There's things around, making sure that people who become, moms and parents, stay with the company, and we track those numbers carefully, and we're, delighted they're as high as they are. And there's initiatives we work on for female entrepreneurs, and there's kind of specific hiring practices, both in how we interview people and, hiring goals, especially in engineering, that we set for managers and stuff like that. But I think sometimes people leap a bit too quickly to kind of what's their checklist of initiatives, and then they think they're kind of done. I think that if you're actually going to take this seriously, if you're actually going to do it well, I think it has to be something that is really deeply kind of just suffused in the culture, and that everybody lives every day. Because you can have a good list of initiatives, but if it's not really in the culture, then it's just not going to work.
Now, before we go, I understand there's a third Collison brother who, as I hear, is even more tech savvy than you are. Tell me about Tommy.
Yeah, so Tommy is 4 years my junior, and Tommy was very interested in this topic that we talk about the implications of technology and the fact that more of our lives are moving online. He was really interested in that before it was the talk of the town and before it was the cool thing to be into. And so we worked at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is a very storied non-profit around digital rights and digital privacy and things like that. And he now works for a company or a non-profit called Tor, who produce traceless or privacy preserving software, especially used by journalists and people like that. So yeah, I think he is the one to watch, really. He's taking a very different tack on this stuff.
He was born with cerebral palsy. I'm curious how that impacted your relationship as a trio.
So it kind of affected the whole family environment. And as a kid sort of growing up, whatever circumstances you grew up in, you just kind of consider normal, right? And for him and for our parents and for us, it was very no nonsense in that, there's this disadvantage or sort of unfortunate piece of luck. Well, that's fine. You just figure out what the game plan is to overcome it, and then work to make that happen. And he walks and he runs and he swims and he cycles and everything else. And again, that took a lot of work. But there was no wallowing in self-pity or anything like that. And as John mentioned earlier, both of our parents were entrepreneurs. And again, kind of similarly there, people sometimes ask us, what inspired us to become entrepreneurs or something like that. And for us, it was. It was just the normal thing. I just see it as kind of a theme running through our upbringing in general, and the sort of no-nonsense way in which both he and, again, our parents approached it. I mean, I find it kind of inspiring, honestly, and it helps sort of keep in perspective, the challenges of, building a fast-growing company or something like that. It's seeing the work that he's invested, again, now over the course of decades. I mean, it keeps it all in perspective.
So what is your advice for aspiring entrepreneurs or people who may not look like you, who want to do what you do?
The first thing is to an increasing extent, you don't have to be here.
Yeah. And that's very different even versus 10 or 15 years ago.
Of Wirecast.
Yes. Yeah. And it depends on the kind of company you're building. Like for Stripe, given we're serving other technology companies, there are kind of some pretty significant benefits to being here. But you can almost certainly do it wherever you are today. I would take advantage of the communities, tools, and knowledge the internet now makes available and start where you are right now.
How do you see yourselves navigating your partnership, your relationship as brothers, as the company grows and the stakes, if all goes well, right,
This
only
is a
get higher?
demonstration of
We've figured it
Wirecast.
out. We've survived this long. I'm not too worried about it on a go forward basis. But in particular, it's very.
I think after 20 years, we can extrapolate we'll at least survive another couple.
Right.
Exactly.
Who gets the last word, by the way, when you disagree?
Gosh, I can't remember the last time we even had a discussion about figuring that out, because when you're so focused on the work, Stripe just passed 1,000 people. We're still hiring very quickly. There's always the next problem and the next interaction to go with. And so I think one of the things that I find very enjoyable is when you have a high trust environment, which we do, and you've been working together for a long time, you're sort of not focused on the meta structure and how do we arrange the Lego bricks and things like that. You're always focused on the next problem.
Where will Stripe be in, let's say, 5 years?
I hope that we have substantially completed this work of building this globally unified economic infrastructure that serves companies of every size and that makes it possible for way more companies to get started and sort of companies to get started no matter what country in the world they're in. I still think it's absolutely freaking crazy that if you start a business in Indonesia, good luck selling to customers in America. And if you start a business in Germany, good luck selling to consumers in China and so on. It's like we should be up in arms over the fact that the internet does not make this infrastructure available today, that it's not complete. And I'm very proud of sort of, the progress we've made over the first, 6-7 years. But, we've quite a ways left to go. When we're sitting here, I hope in 5 years, I hope that sort of that foundational infrastructure, has been put in place, and now at that point, then we can be kind of turning our sights to, what comes after it.
All right. I'm scheduling our catch-up for 5 years from now.
We'll set a calendar reminder.
John and Patrick.
Sir, please believe me, I'm in this business for the last 12 years. Okay, I'll wait for your call. Thank you so much.
They still don't know you after all these years?
क्या करें? पहचान ही नहीं है.
Simple solution hai. List on the stock exchange. With listing comes recognition. Investors get interested in you. And funding happens.
Come on, yaar. I'm not big enough to list. Chal, let's leave.
There's a stock exchange exclusively for your kind of company. NSE Merge. It's the right platform for your business.
Really?
Yeah.
My kind of company?
Exactly. Get listed. Get recognized. अरे भाई हीरे की असली परख जौहरी को ही तो होती है. चल.
NSE Merge. साथ हमारा, सफलता आपकी. The SME Growth Platform from India's largest stock exchange.
Of Wirecast.
Anything and everything about your investments. We're just a touch away. Monday to Friday at 12:30 p.m. Only on Bloomberg Quint. What if lucky discoveries could be discovered without luck? What if the secret code to investing was no longer secret? Could the complexities of business not be so complex anymore? Decode, demystify, learn. BQ Learning. Only on Bloomberg Quint.
Demonstration of Wirecast.
Hello and welcome to this special conversation on